Laramie Tunsil walked straight to the medical tent after a full-speed rep against Odafe Owe, and in a minute I'll tell you if Jaden Daniels' blindside protector is out for weeks. Sonny Styles dropped a bombshell riding shotgun with Dale Earnhardt Jr., revealing who texted him first after the draft, and the answer is gonna shock you. Stefon Diggs already stole a rookie's jersey number in the receiver room and sparked a real fight for the last roster spots. Raise hail. Okay, let us go step by step because I want you to understand exactly how this unfolded. It was Saturday morning, early at Ortho Virginia Training Center, the Commanders' training home in Ashburn. Practice was running normal, the typical rhythm of these first full pads days, when it hit the one-on-one period between offensive line and edge rushers. And on one of those reps, against Odafe Owe, one of the more expensive edge rushers on the roster, something went wrong. The player went down, stayed there for a moment, and when he got up, he walked straight toward the medical tent with help from the training staff. He did not jog it off, he did not give that classic "I am fine," just a little tap body language. He walked slow, with the look of someone who had just felt something real. Okay, here it is. The player is Laramie Tunsil, the all-pro left tackle, Jaden Daniels' blindside protector, the man Adam Peters traded for from Houston before the 2025 season, who then turned in, honestly, one of the best seasons of his entire career, even as the team finished 5-12 and earned himself a 2-year, $60.2 million contract extension in March. That is the player who walked toward the medical tent this morning. And look, I completely understand why the entire field went tense for several minutes. Let us go through what we actually know right now, because there is some conflicting information floating around, and I want you to have the full picture, not half-truths. Mike Garafolo of NFL Network, who was there in person alongside Brian Baldinger, posted that Tunsil walked off with the trainers after taking a hit during the one-on-ones against Owe, and said it looked, in his words, like a stinger. For anyone not familiar with the medical slang of football, a stinger is a nerve injury, usually in the neck or shoulder area, that produces an electric shooting sensation down the arm. It can hurt like crazy in the moment, scare anyone watching from the sideline, and still resolve within days without leaving any real lasting damage. That is the optimistic version. Now here's the version that makes me a little more cautious. Hours later, Garafolo updated his report and said, word for word, that Tunsil's injury, which appeared to be shoulder or neck, would be evaluated and tested, and he added that he was not sensing any huge panic in the building, but that he would not be surprised if the player missed some time. Nikki Jabvala of The Athletic, who was also on site, confirmed that Tunsil was examined in the medical tent and then taken back up to the team facility for further evaluation. To me, that alone is a signal that this was not some little tap you shake off right there on the field with an ice pack and move on. When they walk you inside for testing, it is because the medical staff wants to rule something more serious out before taking any risk. And here's the piece of information that worries me a bit more as a fan trying to analyze this with a clear head. This was not the only scare of the day. According to Rigo's Rag, cornerback Trey Amos, who was only in his second practice back after a long absence, also left practice early with an undisclosed issue. Two important players leaving the field on the same morning is not statistical coincidence. It is simply the kind of day every NFL team dreads during camp, when the body is not yet fully adjusted to full pads intensity after months of lighter OTA work. Now let us talk about why this matters so specifically for Tunsil and not for just any other lineman on the roster. Laramie Tunsil is not a rotational piece. He is, without exaggeration, one of the best active left tackles in the entire league. He was drafted 13th overall by Miami back in 2016, and although he had a rocky start to his career with the Dolphins, he fully blossomed after being traded to Houston ahead of the 2019 season. In 6 years with the Texans, he made the Pro Bowl in every season but one, 2021, when thumb surgery cut his campaign short after 5 games. 5 Pro Bowl selections total. And when Adam Peters brought him to Washington ahead of last season, the bet was clear. Protect the blind side of a young quarterback who was just starting his career. Tunsil delivered. He started all 14 games he appeared in last season, and across his entire career, he has started all 139 games he has played in. That is a level of physical consistency very few offensive linemen in this league can claim. Let me give you the historical context too, because this is not the first time Tunsil has come off a camp practice with something physical going on. Last year, in July of 2025, he suffered a minor groin injury during camp that sidelined him for a few days before he returned for the team scrimmage. At the time, it was not a big deal. But when you see a pattern across 2 consecutive summers of some kind of physical setback during camp, even if each one individually is minor, it starts becoming something an analyst has to flag for tracking, not to spark panic, but to stay alert. I am going to give you my personal opinion here, with a specific date attached, because I think that is what you all expect from this channel, and not just me repeating what the reporters already said. Here is my read. If this really is a stinger, as Garofalo's initial report suggests, the typical recovery window for that injury runs anywhere from a few days to about 2 weeks, depending on how severe the nerve irritation is. My prediction, date on the table right now, I expect to see Tunsil back doing some kind of individual work, or at least on the fringe of practice before Thursday, August 13th. If we get to Monday, August 17th, and Tunsil is still completely out of team drills, that is when I start genuinely worrying, because that would mean the shoulder and neck evaluation found something more structural than a simple stinger. I could be wrong, but that would be the signal that we are talking weeks, not days. And I want to put a piece of criticism on the table here, directed straight at Adam Peters. Washington entered this season with an offensive line that leans heavily on 2 or 3 pieces that are basically irreplaceable without a noticeable drop in play level. Tunsil is number 1 on that list, and while I fully understand this year's draft and free agency were focused on other areas of need, watching Andrew Wiley step in as the emergency left tackle replacement, a spot where Wiley has historically played on the right side, reminds me that the depth behind Tunsil remains a real question mark. If this injury ends up being anything more than 2 or 3 weeks, we are going to find out in real time exactly how prepared this roster is to survive without its blindside protector, and that is an uncomfortable conversation the front office is going to have to answer for if the worst case scenario becomes reality. And I will tell you this straight from the heart, as a fan, watching him go down like that hits different than any other random practice injury, because we have all seen this movie before with blindside protectors on other teams, and we know how it ends when the depth behind them is not up to the level of the starter. This is not hate toward Andrew Wiley, who is a solid rotational swing tackle and has done his job when called on. But asking him to hold up at an all-pro level for weeks on end is a completely different ask. And honestly, that part keeps me up a little more than the injury itself. Now, I also do not want you leaving this segment with your heart in your throat without any reassuring context. Garofalo himself, who was there in person and saw the play live, explicitly said he was not sensing a huge panic within the building. That matters. Reporters who cover this team day in and day out have a developed instinct for telling the difference between a "this looks genuinely bad" reaction and a routine caution reaction, and the overall tone of today's reports leaned more toward caution than full alarm. So my closing message on this one is, stay calm. Let us be smart fans who wait for the real medical information before writing the season's obituary. But let us also be honest with each other about what is at stake if this gets complicated. Jaden Daniels needs a healthy Laremy Tunsil behind him, period. We are going to be monitoring this closely, and the moment new information drops, you all are going to hear it here first. I needed that breather, honestly, because after talking about medical tents and shoulder scans, I want to move to something that genuinely has me excited about this defense heading into 2026. And that something has a name: SONNY Styles, the rookie linebacker Washington selected with the number 7 overall pick in this year's draft, fresh off winning the national championship with Ohio State. Some content dropped this week that, honestly, I did not expect to give me this much analytical value, but it ended up handing me several pieces of information nobody else had reported yet. Dale Earnhardt Jr., the NASCAR legend who happens to be a self-confessed Commanders fan for years now, invited Styles onto his podcast, Taking Laps, where he literally drives a car around a track while interviewing his guests. The two of them sat together doing laps around Atlanta Motor Speedway, and the conversation ended up revealing things no traditional reporter had pulled out yet. And honestly, as someone who spends every week analyzing coverage of this team, this is something I genuinely appreciate. While the accredited press keeps asking the same 5 questions in the Ashburn press room, a race car podcast ended up pulling out real information nobody else had. That confirms something I have suspected for a while now. Sometimes the best coverage of this team does not come out of the official press room. It comes out of random spaces where the player actually relaxes and lets his guard down. First piece of information that hit me: when Earnhardt asked who texted him first the moment it was confirmed Washington had drafted him, Styles did not hesitate for a second. The answer was Laremy Tunsil. Sit with that for a moment, DMV family. The All-Pro left tackle, an established veteran on the offensive line, the same player we just spent the entire first segment talking about, was among the first to welcome a defensive rookie who does not even play on the same side of the ball. That is not roster protocol. That is not a locker room obligation. That is real team culture, the kind of detail that does not get manufactured for cameras because literally nobody knew this had even happened until Styles brought it up on a race car podcast. Then Earnhardt asked what Jaden Daniels told him once he found out he was heading to Washington, and while Styles did not go into the exact details of that conversation, he made it clear the connection with the franchise quarterback started almost immediately. And this ties directly into something Styles had already shared in a separate interview, this one with Commanders Daily, about why he felt Washington was home even before the draft happened. When he visited the facility in person and spent time around Coach Quinn, the general manager, and the entire coaching staff, he said it flat out felt right that he had a feeling going into the draft that this was where he was going to end up. And he added something that tells you a lot about the environment Dan Quinn has built in Ashburn. He said Quinn makes it easy to play for him. Now, beyond the emotional side and the locker room culture piece, let us talk tactics, because Styles is not here just to give good interviews. He is here to change the physical level of this defense. His combine performance was, without exaggeration, one of the most impressive we have seen at the linebacker position in over 20 years. His vertical jump surpassed even Nick Emenwari's, the Seattle safety whose 43-inch jump had been the best mark of the 2025 Combine. On a guy who stands 6'5", that is practically illegal. Sam Cosmi, Washington's starting right guard, said Styles has every athletic trait you can think of, and that he is one of the biggest linebackers he has ever seen move the way he moves. And this is not staying on paper. In training camp practices, Styles is already showing that talent in live reps against Terry McLaurin himself. Chris Russell of the Team 980 reported that on one play, Styles covered McLaurin and forced a short, incomplete pass. And on a different rep, the same reporter watched Styles drop out in coverage against McLaurin, took him out of the play in his own words, forcing Jaden Daniels to check the ball down underneath. Listen to me on this one. When a rookie linebacker is limiting options against the #1 receiver in the offense during camp reps, that is a massive signal of real ceiling, not just theoretical combine upside. Dan Quinn, who is not exactly a coach who hands out free public praise, gave Styles a specific challenge that tells you exactly what kind of player he wants him to become. According to ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, Quinn said he wants to push Styles to make a mistake, that he is giving him explicit permission to take risks other players on this roster could not attempt. Quinn's actual quote was something along the lines of, "You can make that play and the other guys cannot, so you have permission to try it." I find that fascinating as a piece of talent development analysis. Quinn identified that Styles, being naturally respectful and disciplined, could end up playing too cautiously if nobody pushes him to let loose. And part of the job for Quinn and new defensive coordinator Durante Jones is unlocking that more aggressive side without breaking the overall structure of the defense. Back to the Earnhardt podcast, the final question they asked was which player or position he is most excited to face this season. And Styles' answer was pretty much what anyone who knows his playing style would have guessed. He said he is excited to face the greats, specifically naming Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, and Saquon Barkley. It is not a coincidence he named two of the biggest, most powerful running backs in the entire league. Styles wants to measure himself against size and power, not hide from it, and that lines up perfectly with the physical profile we just described. Look, I am not saying Luvu is going to lose his job, and I am not saying Styles becomes a full-time starter overnight. That would be overselling it. But I am saying the hierarchy of this defense is going to look different than we all pictured back in May. And for a unit that desperately needed more raw athleticism after last season, that is a great problem to have, not some ego battle between veteran and rookie. My personal prediction, with an exact date on the table, by week 5 of the regular season, which lands in early October, Sonny Styles is going to be taking more defensive snaps than Frankie Luvu in passing situations, specifically in coverage packages against tight ends and backs releasing out of the backfield. I could be wrong, honestly, because Luvu arrived as a certified All-Pro and Quinn is not going to pull him off the field without reason, but the combination of the athleticism, the confidence Quinn is already publicly investing in him, and what we are seeing in camp against McLaurin tells me this rookie is going to force tough decisions sooner than most people expect. And if I am wrong, I will tell you all right here on this channel, no problem. And to close things out, I want to talk about something that maybe does not carry the same drama as an injury or the same hype as a combine highlight, but as a tactical analyst, I find it fascinating. The way Stefon Diggs' arrival is already literally reorganizing the entire Washington receiver room, from jersey numbers all the way to the full map of who survives the final roster cut. Let us start with the most curious detail, because this is the kind of story that only happens in a real locker room. Diggs practiced with his new team for the first time on Friday, and when he stepped onto the field, he was wearing number 18. For anyone who has followed Diggs' career, that stands out immediately, because in 9 of his 11 NFL seasons, Diggs wore number 14. Why the switch? Because 14 already had an owner in Washington, third-round rookie Antonio Williams. And instead of any kind of tension over the number, the opposite happened. After practice, when the media asked him about the current receivers on the roster, Diggs did not hesitate to praise Williams directly. He said, and I am paraphrasing here, that the young guy wearing 14 can go get the ball in the air a little bit, referencing his ability to high point contested catches, and added, half joking, that the young guys have not earned a name yet, that for now he is just 14, but that he has got something real. That comment, even though it sounds light and even a little funny, actually tells me something important about how Diggs is entering this locker room. He did not show up acting like the superstar here to overshadow every young receiver in the room. He showed up positioning himself as a mentor, recognizing someone else's talent within his first week, and that from an 11-year veteran joining a brand new team says a lot about his professional approach at this stage of his career. And honestly, after everything that got discussed about Diggs' legal situation before a Boston jury acquitted him back in May, seeing this kind of public soft leadership gesture from day one is exactly the signal Washington needed to see. Now, being honest and without trying to sound cynical, Diggs is also a player who knows exactly how to handle cameras and narrative. He has 11 years in this league and has come up through complicated locker rooms in Minnesota, Buffalo, Houston, and New England. So I am not going to rule out the possibility that part of this gesture is calculated, a smart way to win the locker room over fast after all the legal noise he carried over the past year. But calculated or genuine, the practical result ends up being the same. A rookie gets publicly validated by a superstar in his first week working together, and that builds team culture regardless of the exact motivation behind it. Now let us get to the part that actually matters for the roster heading into the season. Diggs' arrival completely changed the math of the receiver room, and that is sparking a fierce internal competition that is going to define some painful roster cuts in the coming weeks. Before Diggs signed, the depth chart behind Terry McLaurin was honestly pretty thin. Treylon Burks, Luke McCaffrey, and Antonio Williams himself fighting for meaningful roles, with none of them fully separating from the pack. With Diggs on the roster, suddenly McLaurin, Diggs, and Williams become practically locked-in locks, and that leaves a much smaller window for everyone else. And this is where Luke McCaffrey enters the conversation in a way I find genuinely interesting to break down. According to Hogshaven's breakdown of the first full pads practices, McCaffrey has been putting together literally the best consecutive stretch of practices of the entire receiver room this week. He had a good day Monday, a great one Tuesday with multiple receptions including a catch and run for a long touchdown, and followed that up with another splash play Wednesday. In the site's own written analysis, McCaffrey made his case this week to be considered one of the roster locks, right at the moment when the competition got harder, not easier, because of Diggs' arrival. That tells me a lot about this player's competitive character. Instead of shrinking when a veteran superstar walked in the door, he responded by stacking good practices on top of each other, which is exactly the right way to earn a roster spot in the NFL in August. And here I am, going to put my completely personal opinion on the table about McCaffrey, the one I have been carrying for a while now. I think this kid has spent 2 years being underrated by the public conversation around this fan base. He has NFL blood in the family, he has the hands, he has the 4.46 speed, and every single time he gets a real sustained opportunity, he answers it. If by the end of this camp, people are still doubting his spot on the roster just because a bigger name walked through the door, that says more about this fan base's bias toward recognizable names than it does about McCaffrey's actual level on the field. Meanwhile, De'Ami Brown and Jalen Lane had some drops on key throws this week and need to build more consistency, though Lane probably locks up his spot anyway thanks to his role as a punt returner, a specialized skill that almost always buys an extra ticket onto the final roster. Treylon Burks, after recovering from some foot soreness, continues taking first-team reps alongside McCaffrey, and Jaden Daniels specifically singled him out in his own public assessment of the receiver room this past Saturday. So what does all of this mean in practical roster terms? Washington almost certainly does not keep the 8 or 9 receivers currently on the camp roster. The realistic number lands somewhere between 6 and 7 bodies at the position once the cut to 53 players hits on August 30th. McLaurin, Diggs, and Williams are essentially confirmed. That leaves somewhere between 3 and 4 spots to fight over among McCaffrey, Burks, Lane, Brown, Van Jefferson, and Jacoby Jones. And based on what we are seeing so far, here is my personal read, date on the table, so you all can hold me accountable later. When Washington announces its 53-man roster on August 30th, Luke McCaffrey is going to be on that list in a secondary slot receiver role behind Diggs. And it is going to be Van Jefferson, not Dyami Brown, who ends up on the outside looking in. I could be wrong, because there are still full weeks of practice left, and at least a couple of preseason games where these numbers can shift quite a bit, but the current trend clearly points in that direction, and if I am wrong, I will own it right here. No excuses. And that wraps up today's video, family. We started with a real scare. Laramie Tunsil walking toward the medical tent and the entire fan base holding its breath for what felt like forever. We moved through a moment of pure pride with SONNY Styles, a rookie already showing exactly why Adam Peters took him in the top 10 of the draft, and who also carries the kind of personality and team culture you want sitting at the heart of a brand new defense. And we closed with Stefon Diggs, who in barely a week is already rewriting the entire map of the receiver room, praising rookies and pushing players like Luke McCaffrey to raise their level of play just by being in the building. This franchise has spent years building itself piece by piece, and even though today reminded us how fragile all of that can be with a single practice rep, it also reminded us why we keep showing up, why we keep watching every practice, every podcast, every update out of Ashburn like it is the most important event of the week. Because it is. This team has the talent, has the quarterback, and now has the depth to genuinely compete this season as long as health cooperates. If this video gave you something real today, something you did not find anywhere else, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel keep growing. And I want you to tell me in the comments, do you think the Tunsil situation is just a passing scare? Or do you feel like this could turn into something bigger? I am going to read every single comment, and I will see you in the next one with the freshest updates straight out of Ashburn. Raise hail, always.